So far, so good.
All right.
And you're on page 4.
Yes. This is the list you have. So as mentioned up here, both the Millennial Generation, we often came across different ages of what the span, but we're going to go with the 18 to 33 years old. Some say a little bit older, starting around 22, and others say even younger than 18. But I separated these characteristics into positive and negative, even though I don't always think that those fit in those categories all too well. But first of all, as Tom mentioned, millennials want to live their lives to make a real difference. They're socially conscious. When they do social good, are conscious about environmental issues, and especially social issues. This has led them to embrace social entrepreneurship a little bit more, and some sources even say that drive for entrepreneurship could also be from the instability of the workplace as well. They are very civic-minded and connected to the planet as well as those around it. And one discovery, or maybe an obvious one, of why they may be more connected is because as millennials, we are digital natives. We are hardwired into our news through the internet. We are globally aware of what's going on around the world through social media and other sources. And that also creates an opportunity where we often can mobilize our networks pretty quickly, whether that's through word of mouth or oftentimes through social media. One characteristic that we often come by when researching is that millennials are highly confident and optimistic in the midst of a rough economy and some pretty big challenges. Whether that is because of a large hope in what might be coming, or if they're naive or unaware of challenges, I'm not sure. Or even if it's a form of escapism from maybe some challenges that we have, or if it's really true hope that we think things will change and that we can be part of that. We're also more highly educated. We are willing to sacrifice in pursuit of education. But another point that I discovered was oftentimes some of us go back to school because of tough economic times, and that we don't feel like we are succeeding in the job market, and so we decided to go back to school. I know that was true for me. Well, as millennials, we are politically independent, yet vote more democratically, and we are socially liberal. We are the first generation where liberals are not outnumbered by conservatives. We are more racially diverse, and many sources say in the next 30 years that the population will be majority non-white. As well, we value parenthood and marriage over money and career, though some seem to postpone those things because of money, because we don't feel stable financially. We often seem to get along better with others. We're more tolerant of various views on different issues, and we love being part of a team. There is less conflict with other generations. Because we're more focused on inequalities. We are embracing the sharing economy, a little bit less materialistic, though I don't know if that's always true. Some of the optimism that we hear about says that we expect to have what we need to pursue our lifestyle in the midst of a tough economy, which I'm not sure if that's because we can't afford more, and so we just lessen our lifestyles. I think there's a big move towards more simplistic lifestyle. whether that's a choice or not, that's what we've embraced. We value authenticity more than other generations. We're dissatisfied with the status quo, and we are spiritual but not religious. But there's a huge declining participation with the church. Some studies show that we are fairly traditional in our beliefs and practices, yet we're more accepting of others' way of life. And we trust the church less and trust the government a little bit more. We live in tough economic conditions, which is because of the recession, as well as the increasing wealth gap. This often leads to us working temporary jobs to get by, possibly moving in with our parents once we graduate, going back to school possibly, and postponing other choices in our lives. We have a much higher school debt, and often some studies show that because of loans we postpone saving money for retirement. There's a higher unemployed and underemployment. One study said that oftentimes millennials are the last to be hired and the first to be fired. We're less financially independent, often depending on parents and others for financial help. One study said though we're educated, we're not always useful for getting a job. Rather than new graduates, rather than people looking to hire new graduates for entry-level jobs, they're looking for people with experience instead of education. And this is also because many jobs have been outsourced. A negative view of millennials is that we are narcissistic and lazy, yet there is a big push from millennials to disprove this misconception, which is interesting to have that view, as well as many view millennials as those who are going to change the world and do great things. Like I mentioned, we're a less trustful religion and other institutions, yet we seem to be more trustful in the government, nonprofits, and universities. Let's see. Yeah, that's kind of a broad overview. There's a little bit more details in the paper that you have. Is there any questions you might have about those characteristics, or that you want to add more maybe?
Sure.
It's interesting. I'm not sure if there's any sort of material you've seen about family configuration around millennials. Any sort of data that.
Some stuff says that we get along with our families better. I imagine in some ways we have to if we want to live with our parents. And I think there's support systems have to form when we can't support ourselves. So I think there's probably a little bit of a stronger connection there, and maybe we rely and take the views and opinions of our parents a little more seriously now that we've grown up and we realize that we don't have it all figured out. And I think there's some desire to gain wisdom from older generations who have maybe not gone through the same things, but have, gone through things that we haven't yet, and they have some advice for us.
It's interesting, I would say too, as a parent, just I'm owning the culture. The culture is not providing some opportunity because that opportunity is provided for me. I actually feel some sense of ownership for that. Like I didn't do enough. There's something we could have done more, and are they prepared? And I find myself being concerned about their preparation for context is changing on them as if it's my fault. I feel that at times. So the interlocking piece, and I'm a boomer.
I have a question or just a thought, and we had 2 millennials move back into our home last night, so if I doze off in the middle, it's because we were washing floors and moving stuff till really late. But yeah, I think this is amazing stuff. But a few years ago, Bakari Kitwana wrote a book about the hip-hop generation, and one of the challenges in his book was that there was all this emphasis on postmodernity and thinking about postmodernity and what that meant. And Kitwana's research began to address the issue of, wait, there's another generation of young people that are not part of that postmodernity, but are part of this hip-hop culture that's thinking about things differently. And this isn't just music. This is a whole way of viewing the world. And that coupled with, as Linda and I taught social entrepreneurship, one of the things that we discovered with Jon was that much of this entrepreneurial effort came out of the dot-com crash. It came out of people that thought, oh my gosh, I have to work independently because but yet I wonder if that is skewed towards white upper middle class folks. How does this information fit across cultural lines and different demographics of people? Who are they sampling? Because I just wonder if there's undercurrents of culture that this might, and I'm not saying it misses it, but I just wonder about that in light of what Kitwana said about hip-hop culture being ignored in this big emphasis of postmodernity.
That's also a question I had, because when I read this and millennials moving back home, the reality is in many Asian families and bicultural families, that was always the expectation.
Right.
So that you would get a leg up when you're ready to move out. Getting married is usually the first entree into moving out of the house. So there's a in some ways, I think this comes from a very American, white American perspective in some ways. I'm not saying there isn't some overlap like that, but there is some of that. And so years ago, when people are saying, yeah, people are moving back into parents' homes, I'm like, welcome to the way the rest of the world works.
That's great. What were the sources and methods?
Well, it's interesting again. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, what were the sources and methods of the studies? Where did they get their data from, and how did they collect it?
Right. Like the stuff that Derek sent you and the emails, a lot of it is the Pew Research, and they go a little bit more into different demographics and percentages on their views on different things. It says a little bit more in there where they got their information.
But it also speaks to the question framed for the research, because you approach research with a question, and so the question is, this is a problem. In other words, it's problematized. And so then you're figuring out, okay, if this is a problem, what should we do about it? As opposed to recognizing in some ways there's a cultural shift. This is not, but this has also been going on for a very long time. And so how we problematize is important for us to think about what we think the solution might possibly be.
One of my other questions would be, with this kind of more connection to parents or to family, are people actually staying home more, like staying in their hometowns? Is there less fragmentation that's actually happening in our culture? I don't know if that came out at all.
I've seen some research recently that says just that people aren't venturing out, they're not moving to other cities because of the cost factor of moving to Seattle or LA, whereas they're in small town home Nebraska, where the money works better for them. So that's one I don't remember the source.
Well, and in reference to the different dynamics of different cultures, one of the articles, and I don't remember which one that I looked at, said that the trend in terms of going away from religion is very definitely a white trend. That in other cultures, they're not becoming less religious. So there are obviously cultural dynamics that aren't necessarily being taken into account in some of the research that's being done. I think you're definitely right.
Me, like as a millennial, I feel like most of my friends actually were like, I just need to get out. I just need to get away from home. And then there's this realization that we can't do it. That it just isn't working for us. That financially or psychologically we can't handle or maintain what's going on around us, and then we go. It's almost like a parable of the return of the prodigal son, like moment of like, we can't do this.
Well, one of the things that we're experiencing with our two sons is we've talked a lot about who you know and access, and both of them looking for jobs, and it seems to be coming back to networking and community and who do you know, and We know a young person that's in university in engineering. He's a freshman and he's in California, but he's talked about coming back to the University of Washington because if he's going to get an internship, he needs to know somebody. So what we're experiencing is that your community is just becoming so essential to what access you have to all